Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Be Healed Web Show. This is the 7th episode in this dynamic series titled The Power of Vulnerability. And I'm so excited to have a special guest. His name is Kermit Boyd III. He's bringing us greetings all the way from North Fontana. We're excited about that. And so he's going to share with us on tonight. But can we just give him a round of applause for being here? Let's welcome him, give him some Be Healed welcome. Yay, I see y'all coming in the comments. Yay, welcome. So, how are you, Mr. Kermit Boyd?
I'm doing good. No complaints. And I'm definitely doing better than I deserve. So that's for sure.
Listen, isn't that the truth? I mean, 2020 has been an interesting year, to say the absolute least. Yeah. Awesome. So on tonight, as you're joining the Power of Vulnerability discussion, I know you're not new to the interview world. Can you tell as an educator and different things, can you tell the audience a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a third, Kermit R. Boyd III. I work in education. I have two hats in education. So I'm an instructor. I teach at the high school level, and then I'm also the educational technology coach. So I hold two hats there. And then on the side, I have a great brotherhood that I'm a part of that was able to venture into two different companies. One of them being called Overbrand, and where we highlight others, just like kind of what you're doing. And so it's a combination of nonprofit and actually clothing. And so we just try to give back. So I think the clothing is very fashionable. You can check us out at overbrand.com. And then I'm also a part of, to give further back to students, I'm part of a SAT prep company where we provide SAT prep to high school juniors and seniors, really all across the nation. COVID was able to open up some opportunities for us to do that. So,
isn't that amazing how this pandemic has released so much? Right. Not just, there's been its share of downs and smiles and frowns, but there's been a blessing, especially for us as believers, for sure. I've seen a lot of things turn around for all of us. So that's good. Awesome. Well, we're going to jump headlong in. So I try to start off with the wheel of vulnerability, turn. Let's kind of see where this will go. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate yourself with vulnerability?
I would say that I'm probably like an 8.5. Okay. And not a full 10, just because I'm sharing and I'm vulnerable 100% with my wife. And then with friends, I am vulnerable. But, when it comes to like work, teaching, I'm not completely vulnerable with my students just because they are, 18 and under. And so there's only so much that I'm only going to share with them. So that's where I say 8.5. Friends and family, especially, just having a tight circle of friends, definitely vulnerable, but 8.5.
That's a fair rating. Okay. Yeah. So we're going to see how we're going to range today, and we're going to make sure we stay within that 8.5.
All right.
I'll make sure we don't go over, because I don't want
for this show, I'll be 100% transparent for the show. So I was giving you the answer overall in my life. But for the show, I'll be 100% transparent.
Okay, cool. Because I try to tell the guys, I'm like, I don't want to press you any further than what you want to go. If we could, if we need to just time out, flag on the play, like, okay, that's what we'll do. So, just to kind of recap a little bit of some of the conversations we've had regarding vulnerability, some of the baseline has dealt with childhood, as well. Now, some not necessarily expounding in that place, but it always came back up in relationships and how they were challenged and maybe overcame some things, or yet overcoming some things in their present day, but a lot of it took root in childhood. And as an educator, the importance of childhood development and all those various mechanisms that makes us, when we're at that formidable age, as they say. So what has been your life in your life's journey, where you can track your healing or track where God has shifted some things, or you've maybe even just grown in it and blossomed, if I can say that. I just thought about an awesome blossom from Chili's when I said that, right? Awesome, yes. But where you might have just blossomed out.
Well, just a little background. I've been married for 11 years. I have a 10-year-old. It's going to be 11 years coming in January. We have a 10-year-old. And so I think my wife would agree with me here. I think one of the ways in which I have blossomed, growing up, I grew up in a very loving, very open household. There was a lot of laughter, a lot of, we were four of us. So we were all close in age. So a lot of fighting, a lot of making fun of, but we were close as siblings. And so growing up in that household, which is very solid, Christian household, and going from there were still things that, you just don't want your parents or your siblings to know about your life, right? And so you try to, hide it, you try to cover it up in the way that you live. And I did that, right? And I'm sure you'll ask me questions about what those things were, but just trying to do that. And then when you get into marriage, you operate kind of in that same way where it's like, oh, my wife doesn't need to know everything about Kermit. She just needs to know what I want her to know, or this is what I'm going to tell her. And so those were some hard lessons for me in the beginning years of our marriage. And a lot of growing, a lot of pain, a lot of D words, divorce and so forth being thrown around. And so one of the ways I've seen God come in and just really heal and bring healing is in the way that not just that way we communicate, but saying, you know what, this is your wife. She's not just that, but she is helpmate. And I think we have a weird understanding of that word, because the word in the Hebrew, when you look at it, actually has the same meaning for God in the Holy Spirit. And so when you think about what she's supposed to be not necessarily God to me, but she has that same place where I can be that close with her. And so I've had to learn how to lean into my wife when I feel stressed, when I feel hurt, when I feel misunderstood, and let her be wisdom to me, let her be the healing that I need. And so for me, a lot of the healing came when I was 100% open with her, where she just became my friend and she became my closest confidant. And a lot of healing took place there, because growing up, especially as a boy to a young man to a man, you just feel like, oh, I could tell my boy certain things. I could tell my family certain things. But when the Bible says that Adam was naked and unashamed with Eve, he was completely open and vulnerable with her. And that's where I am learning to live daily with my wife. And that's been a challenge. And it's things you have to unlearn and deconstruct in your life. And that's where I've seen the biggest healing, to answer your question.
First of all, Doc, you preach it. Okay. Because I'm like, when you said you said a couple of things. I'm gonna go back to the Hebrew term regarding mate. I immediately I was like, paraclete, got it. The helper, right?
Right.
When you mentioned, I don't know if every Everybody knows that. I don't know if wives, women, if we truly know that, if husbands truly know that, men in general, to know
Right.
that it is the what when Jesus said that the Holy Spirit will testify of himself, right?
Mhm.
He helps us. He that umption that like don't go here, do this, or don't do that, or like it's not to squelch or to diminish you, but to enrich,
Right.
uplift, encourage. And then when you wrong, like, hey, what happened here? It's that's so good. Okay, go ahead.
But I mean, but I think that's part of especially because, like I said, I'm Black and I'm Mexican. And I
Mhm.
think that's part of the stigma or the dilemma within our culture, right? Where like we can only be seen as the strongest if I am like looked at this way, or if I'm looked at as the provider, as the breadwinner, or like it looks like I got everything together from the house I live in to the car I drive to the career that I have, and my family looks a certain way. So if you take all those things, they're just they're not the essence of who we are. And I think that's part of the issue, where in order for us to get to a place where we can see what you just said about our wives. And the one thing I've had to learn is not necessarily like putting my wife on a pedestal, but understanding the place that she has in my life. So understanding her pedestal, not putting her on one, but understanding it. And I think that's part of the issue, where when we see them for who they are, then they can be who they are, who we need them to be to us. And that's something that I've had to learn. And I think unfortunately the culture like doesn't do a great job of that, but we can change that narrative. But it
Mhm.
just takes work. It takes transparency. It takes vulnerability. It takes like us being okay with saying, you know what, like I don't have it together,
Yeah.
and I need to get the help that I need.
Yes.
And so vulnerability is hard for men just naturally, but we need it if we want to be truly successful.
Yeah. You have just become my favorite person. I'm like, so where's your book? Like, where when is all of this dropping? Because it's so many gems and jewels that you are dropping. Let's go back. You said you quoted Genesis. I want to say like
Mhm.
maybe it's like three or yeah, three-ish, maybe four,
Mhm.
where naked and unashamed, right?
Right.
Getting to the place of, and you said it takes work. You have to deconstruct and tear away what we have in our culture as being multi-ethnic, because I refuse to say that you're of different races, because there's only one
Mm.
human race, in my
Right.
opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
But you being multi-ethnic from two strong cultures
Right.
that, as you mentioned regarding the material things, but just in regards to how you have to walk in a room, not just
Right.
what you're wearing, but how you speak.
Hmm.
You better not cry watching Bambi. Like all of these things. I mean, Coco, I mean, that I think that made everybody cry. If it didn't, we're hard. But so how 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 do how can one, let me say this, how can one from your cultures and any culture begin to drop the facade or
Mm.
drop the guard? How can one do that?
I mean, well, number one is humility, right? Um, and I always say that, and I've heard it somewhere, I forget who said it, but I've adopted it for myself, where humility is not thinking less, is not thinking of is not thinking that you're less than, but it's thinking about yourself less. And I think that's where it starts, right? And my wife will tell you, like, oh, Kermit's the biggest crier that I know, because I've learned to understand that, like, I'm not trying to, I like to look nice, I like to do all that, right? But I'm not trying to impress anyone,
Mhm.
because it's not that I think less of myself. I'm just not thinking of myself as often as I did in the past. And so I just think it really starts with humility. But here's the thing about humility: you have to be brought to that place. And to be brought to that place, it means there is going to come with it brokenness, and brokenness is very difficult because brokenness can come through trauma. Brokenness can come through deep hurt from relationships, whether it be friendships or dating ones or even marriage, right? So, and it can create this trauma, but brokenness, in one sense, is necessary, and not because like we need it, but it's necessary because you can't really learn how to love until you first learn how to love Christ and then yourself. And then you can learn how to love others, right? And the only way that happens is there has to be a deep contriteness. There has to be deep humility that takes place, but it only takes place through brokenness, which happens, unfortunately, through trauma. So for me, to answer your question in a nutshell, what's happened to me is that I've had to be severely broken and injured. And that injury and that brokenness brought me to a place where it's not that I said, "Oh, Kermit, you're nothing." It's that, no, I understood what my actual worth was. And then I knew how to move in that worth. Um, um, I just think that's what it comes down to in a lot of areas. And that's what I tell my daughter. I'm like, no, you're strong, you're powerful, you're beautiful, but understand you're going to be humble. And so it's just those have to be that has to be it. And yeah.
You only have one child?
Yeah, we only have one. We only have a
Okay.
daughter.
Okay, that's awesome. She has great parents. I can see that already. Okay, because I can when I tell you I could put a nickel on the ask the DJ put a nickel on the record right now and just spin this for a second, but I'm gonna try to continue on. But what you're
Yeah,
saying is so powerful. Um, Brokenness. You mentioned trauma.
right,
Oftentimes, trauma can cause folks to build barricades and
right.
fortified cities around their identity, their heart, and who they are.
Yeah,
How can one anticipate trauma, the brokenness that is needed for humility without in you know building Winterfell?
right. I mean, I don't know if you'll like my answer because I don't know if you can ever, because I don't know if you can anticipate trauma. Like, and I'll tell you my story. I'll get into it a little bit. So, um, I had deep trauma, right? I was in college.
Mhm.
Uh, at this time, my dad has been a pastor for years now. And, you know, high
Mhm.
school, I was, just doing silly things, nothing crazy in my opinion. I get to college, senior year, start kind of wilding out a little bit, right?
Mhm.
And as I wild out, I'm dating this young lady, and I get her pregnant, and I'm like, oh man, what do I do? And I don't know what to do. I have friends in my life. They go to my dad's church. They're telling me, oh, that's not a fetus. Just abort the baby because you had a lot of life to live. It's okay. God will forgive you, right? And as the more I give into their thoughts, right, the more I don't anticipate what it's going to do to me. I don't anticipate the influence because the more I give in, the more that I'm shunning telling my family and having vulnerability with them to get the help that I need. And so what I do is I say, you know what, I'm gonna tell her to get an abortion. Now I didn't know this, but she had an abortion previously, and she already had a child. And I said, you're gonna get this abortion because I don't know what else to do. So she went forward, she did it, and for me, that broke her in the way that it broke a woman, which I don't know, but I only witnessed it. But it also broke me, and it broke me to the point where I wind up getting physically sick. I got osteomyelitis in my right femur, couldn't walk, had to have surgery on my femur to take out all of the dead bone. Just a crazy ordeal that I went through for about 2.5 years. And at the end of that, that's when the Lord began to break me. And when I began to be in a state of brokenness had led me to a psychiatric ward where the doctors at USC said, no, he's schizophrenic and we're going to hold him here for a time. So I was literally in the psychiatric ward. I don't even remember everything that happened in there. But I really believe that was the battleground for my soul. And as I was in there, my dad, being the prayer warrior that he is, and my mother, they prayed. And my dad said, at the end of that time there, he said, I prayed and I felt something in my spirit break. And he said, when it broke in him after 3 days of fasting and praying, he came and I was there and I was in my right mind. I was okay. And I just remember being in that place saying, I need to get out of here. Where am I? I don't want to be here. Crazy people here. Get me out of here. And they let me go. And they let me go. And I was not diagnosed or pronounced as a schizophrenic. They never gave me that label, but I was labeled as that when I was in there. And they couldn't figure out what happened and why I was okay, why I was in that state. And all they attributed it to was great trauma that happened. And they said, he needs to get to the root of his trauma. So I went through some therapy after that. And I say that because I never anticipated that everything that I did from my childhood that led up to making the decisions that I made in college would take me to the place where I would be in a psychiatric ward. So I never could anticipate it, but it's funny that you say that because as I'm saying this, the thing my dad would always say to me, he said, Kermit, he would say, because I get into trouble, and he would say, either your friends are gonna influence you or you're gonna influence your friends. And sure enough, my friends, and I can't blame them, but they had an influence, but I still made the decision to do what I did. And I would say that wisdom is listening to your parents, and not necessarily because they're in the Lord, but because they've lived life and they know some things. And I think anticipation can come that way, but in all reality, you can't, like, it's hard to anticipate what can come. We can prepare ourselves, but for me, I mean, just from my own experience, I never anticipated that I would go through what I went through. And to actually be labeled as schizophrenic and then have the label removed, to actually be in a mental institution, to actually try to kill myself while I was trying to do that in there, because I remember bits and pieces of being in there, and knowing that I made a decision where, and that's why, like, when we get into like the pro-life conversation, I know from experience where it's like, it's hard to have those conversations because you never know what's going on in that person's mind. And I believe in pro-life, but I understand the choice that's involved when it comes down to those things. And it's such a fine line. And I never thought that I would go through any of that. I never thought that I wouldn't be able to walk for a year. That part of so I would have to have surgery, a major traumatic surgery on my femur. And to think that I have all my mental faculties, my body parts, all my limbs, and and what that trauma did, and even after still having to like deal with stupid, I wouldn't say stupid, but still having to deal with traumatic things that I did that like just weren't being dealt with, and the level of vulnerability that I had to go through with men in my life, and getting some counseling a little bit. And it's like, until I did that, then there was freedom. And then I learned how to put up like, okay, I need to watch out for this. I need to put this in place. But typically that happens when we experience the trauma, and especially in our culture, right? And especially, I hate to say this, but in, Black culture, we deal with the aftermath of things. Correct. We don't get in front of it. And I think one thing I learned from someone in my family that told me, they said, hey, their parent was dying and they went through pre-grief counseling. I've never heard of pre-grief counseling, but they weren't Black. And so they went through pre-grief counseling. And I think for us, we have to find a way to go through the pre-trauma counseling. And I think there's a way to do that. But I believe that what I've learned is that it happens in community. And when I say community, I mean a group of people that you are surrounded with, that you can confide in, so that they can see things in your life that are happening to be like, hey, you need to watch out for this or pay attention here. And I have that now, but I didn't have that before, because you're just living life and like living la vida loca. And you're like, you know, just thinking nothing's going to happen to you, but sure enough, it does. And it's, it can be almost, it was almost tragic for me, but I had a praying dad and mom that said otherwise.
Okay. Couple of things. I love the getting ahead of it, the pre-trauma counseling, the pre-grief counseling. So I'm gonna put a placeholder there, and I'm gonna come back to that, because before you said all of that, and you were sharing about the decisions that you were, these were the same friends that you were going to church with, the
Right.
same friends. Like I, I don't know if people caught that. That
Right.
just because you go to church or you're in church, that you don't have these conversations, you don't have these issues, you don't have these. We're human.
I
Number
was a
one.
pastor's kid. I was a pastor's kid.
Right. And see, I'm a PK too. And
Mm.
I always get offended for people like, oh, you a PK. I'm like, just because I know the Bible and I'm doing this too, does not mean like,
Right.
I used to tell people, like, for me, it's worse because hell is supposed to be 7 times hotter. Like, just chill, And so it's what I love about the Lord, though, is that He holds us accountable.
Right.
And so even though your friends gave suggestions, I mean, Job's friend gave suggestions, his wife gave suggestions, right? But it was still your decision. It was still your communication. It was still your action that you had with this other individual. And for you to acknowledge the pain and the brokenness that happened in her, but as well as the man, which I don't think sometimes we realize
Right.
what that does for a man when that time happens too. So that's a whole conversation.
It is.
Let me bring back to another nugget that you shared that I want to just kind of put a nickel on. You said that it was almost like the springboard into what God, because you said you went through that you had the disease in your leg, then here you are in the psychiatric facility.
Mm-hmm.
But you believe like that was where it was the battleground for your soul.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the question that I have, how can one recognize when they're in a battleground for their soul moment? Because I have folks that are watching this show. Some are saved, some are not. Some don't even believe in God. Whatever, I don't even care. Like this is for everybody, because healing is for everybody. But everybody know Jesus. I'm Team Jesus all day. But what can you say to someone to help them recognize that what you're dealing with right now is over your soul? Like there's a battle for your soul.
Yeah, that's a heavy question. Oftentimes, I think that we, in the midst of it, we may not see it, but we feel it. And I think the way that you can feel it, right, is the when it comes down to those, how can I say it? Like it's a heavy decision. A heavy decision for everybody's different, right? But when it's a heavy decision, and you know that if you make that decision, it will change the trajectory of your life. And it will, because I knew that once I said, we're going to get this abortion, I knew that immediately my life would be different from that point on.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that when I had that surgery, my life would be different. I didn't know how from that point on, but I knew that initial decision, which was the start for me in the sense of, do you really believe in Jesus? Because if you do, then your actions would be looking a lot differently. And then here's the thing. If you don't believe in Jesus, then your actions are still going to look a certain way. And so for me, that's where I knew at that moment. And then actually, I look at it as the actual battle where it was a fight for my mind, because mental illness is real. And so it was like the battleground there. And I think one way that a person can recognize is the heaviness of the decision, the direction that decision will take them in, because if you make a certain decision that it will change the course, whether it's like handling money a certain way in the sense that, oh man, if I do this and I get this deal this way, and it's kind of shady, I know that I can make a lot of money, but is that going to be the essence of how you make every deal from there on out? Right. So there's these major decisions that happen in life where like the person can sense it and know, and then when as they sense it and know that this is going to change the way that I live, when they know that, that is the beginning, if you will, kind of like, if I can give us some imagery, it's like that if you think of a medieval war and the old school catapults that are 50 high in the air, and that initial catapult that they launch into the castle to start the war, it's like that. And that's where that battle starts, is right there with the launch of that fiery steel ball that is launched from the catapult into the castle. And as you make that decision, that's exactly what you're doing. And from there, every decision afterward, until you are then able to say, wow, what did I just come through? You're going to then say, this was a battle for my soul. And because I'm not saying that I don't have those now, but I understand why I'm fighting. I understand, and I understand how to fight. Then I just understood that I was in a fight and I didn't even have full faculties of myself, of my mind. If I told you the things that I remember doing in that psychiatric ward, you'll be like, what? It was crazy. And so you may not fully know or sense it in the midst, but when you make that initial decision, you know. When you come out, you know. And then as you look back, you're like, wow, I was in it.
Yeah.
And that would be the best response that I could give to that answer, to that question, excuse me, because that's a really great question.
Okay, because I'm like, I know we got to go up. We got to get to your story because I wanted you to share more of your story, but I'm like, you keep dropping all these jewels. So here I am, just picking up, put them in my satchel and moving on. Okay. So you said regarding the being aware of the decision,
Right.
that the weight of it. Let me say this. You said the weight, and knowing that it can impact the trajectory, the outcome of the life, and the decision that has to be made there. And then also knowing, I would just say maybe the burden or the pain of it all, type, the weight of it. I have to go back because you said something earlier. You said about truly being vulnerable and transparent, how you had to learn to become that with your wife. So you had to tell her those things that you did remember.
Mm-hmm.
Had to tell her about this situation that happened long before you met her. You had like bearing it all and telling the truth. Okay.
Right.
And then saying, I don't know how she's going to take this, but here it is.
Right.
Okay. I have a question. This is it's within the vein.
Yeah.
As a single woman, and I'm a part of a sorority, so I know a lot of women, married, single, divorced, widowed, everything. Know a lot of frat too, a lot of fraternity men. From a woman, what advice can you give a woman or women in general, wherever stage they might be in, whether single, married, or somewhere is complicated, in handling transparency from a man and vulnerability? How should we handle, anticipate, or demand? What should we do?
It's funny. Me and my wife literally had a conversation about this yesterday. We were just talking about it. I think the response is mercy. Often we talk about grace, right? Like grace is getting getting the goodness of what you don't deserve, right? But I think mercy is the answer, because when we talk about forgiveness, right? Like God never says to us, "Oh, okay, I forgive you. Now tell me every offense that you did, line by line, and tell me why you did it and how you did it and how you're going to be different." Like that's what we think forgiveness is. That's what we want it to be. Like, oh, you're sorry. Well, tell me why, and tell me how you're going to change, and tell me how you're going to be different. That's not what God does not do that with us.
Okay.
If he did, we wouldn't think he was very loving.
Right.
Um,
Or
but
omniscient.
Right. But instead, I think the answer is mercy. And this is what I mean. Like, mercy is
Mhm.
her saying, you know what, that was before me. Um, it's not the present. And that was what you did then. I can't hold that against you now, but she would hope that it would make me the man who I am being in that moment with her. Right. But I think the other response too is from just a woman's perspective is, how can I say this? Is letting her ask those tough questions to you, and then you not getting defensive and being able to answer them. So I think for a woman, it's like, as he tells you, lean into what he's saying. Don't judge him, but at the same time, ask him, can I ask you some questions about what you did? And like, because I think that's important, because typically as we work through our stuff, say it like that, as we work through our stuff, we're still working through it. We're not perfect. And so a lot of that baggage we are going to bring into the marriage, right? So she needs to know so she can say, you know what? I need to be on the lookout for this. So you have to be able to ask those tough questions. Um, I don't think my wife asked the tough questions, but she learned later, like, I should have asked you more questions when you
Yeah.
told me. Because I think that she graciously listened and accepted it and was like, wow, you've been through a lot. And I think that on the mercy side, it would have been, I'm listening and you have my love and my devotion, but now I need to ask you some questions. I need to know, like, kind of what got you there. I need to know, like, what you were thinking when you did some of the things that you did. And I think that would have been helpful so that she could know the inner workings of me
Mhm.
and how to then know how to, like, handle me. Because I think that my wife has a lot of wisdom. I think a lot of Black women do. And I think because of that, they need to be able to ask those difficult questions like, hey, well, what about this or what about that?
Yeah.
Because asking questions is important. So I tell my daughter, I say, ask questions.
Mhm.
Don't just let them tell you, you ask questions. And this is how you ask them. And that's what I would say the best is listen and ask questions. Just don't accept it for face value because you're valuable too as a woman and you have to know your worth. And if he did it to someone else, he may do it to you.
Right.
And you got to know not to be a victim, or to allow to be one, because it's not fair to you.
Like I said, you all right with me, Doc? Okay. I love that because one of the things I've always been an investigative person.
Hmm.
Always. Like, I need more insight. Um, and that's and I thank God for when you were mentioning that, I was just like, this is probably why I have the show, because I
Hmm.
ask questions like, no, don't just give me like I'm good. I hate when I hear people, you ask them how you're doing. Oh, I'm good. Come on, let's unpack that.
Yeah.
What's the pits and peaks? When I think about when I look at couples and try to help in couples relationships from a Christian perspective, because not having walked that way, I don't give natural advice. But from a spiritual perspective, the scripture talks often about husband love,
Hmm.
wife submit, both of you submit to Christ in one another, right? Do you request, demand the same vulnerability from your wife and
No,
transparency?
no. Um, Her trauma is her trauma, and the way that she unpacks that with me is the way that is going to be the best for her. So I don't demand it. I don't think it would be fair to. Uh,
Mhm.
Now, if it becomes like this recurring issue, then we need to begin to talk about it, and begin to address it and deal with it. But I think if you're going to be married long enough, you're going to get to some tough issues that happened, from childhood to teenage to adulthood, right? You're going to get to some very tough issues. And I just think that because marriage is momentary and it's only for this life, it like you have to make a decision to be like, I've married her and I'm going to be committed to this. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said it best. He said, it's not love that sustains the marriage, but it's marriage that sustains the love, meaning that it's the commitment, right? It's the commitment to it's the commitment to I love you. So if I'm committed to this person, I'm not always going to say I love you, but I'm going to be committed to this person so that when I love you comes, I'll be ready to say it. And I think that's the part, right? So for me, I don't force her to be vulnerable. I don't say, oh, you need to tell me this. It's like, if you want to talk, I'm here. I'm going to listen. But I have to be ready, because men do a bad job of this, to give her undivided attention, not to be doing multiple things or watching TV or reading a book or engaged in something on my phone. I need to put everything down and say, I'm listening, talk.
I'm sorry. There were some men who weren't listening. Can you say that again?
You just got to put everything down. Whatever it is you're doing, you have to, when they're ready to talk, put it down, stop, and just listen and be engaged. And that's the one thing that's helped me, where when she talks and she starts to talk to me seriously, I'll literally, like, since I'm working from home now, I'll turn my chair and I'll just stop what I'm doing and I'll listen. And if I'm in a meeting, I'll say, babe, let me finish this meeting. I'll get right to you. But I think that's the biggest thing as men, where we can drop the ball. We're like, why did she get mad at me? Because you're not taking the time to listen. That was a tough lesson. I still learn it, but it's a tough lesson to get through. And you're going to keep having that lesson until you actually, I don't say pass it, but until you can, like, check for competency on that lesson, then you can go on to unit 2 of marriage, or whatever you want to call it. But it's not about passing a test. It's about having competency, because anybody can pass a test if you know what things to study. But to actually have competency, yeah, exactly, or you have good notes. But to actually have competency means I actually know the material, and the material makes sense to me. And the Bible says to live with your wife in understanding in 1 Peter 3:18. And so we have to do that by being able to listen.
Okay, you said 1 Peter 3:18. I'm gonna make sure we
double check
3:18. For those that are listening, taking notes, please make sure you write down 1 Peter 3:18. Yes. All right.
I'll do a fact check, make sure I got that scripture right too.
Because my mind is going, because you're speaking my language, because I actually work in education. I work for Mount St. College, and I'm actually a curriculum designer, content creator, instructional designer, etc. All those titles. Right. But and I just had this conversation with your friend Chucky, Willie. I said, when I create training material or courses in Canvas, I'm checking for, are we able to change behavior, to change the result with the content presented?
Right.
You mentioned about what all I kept hearing was content mastery. Do I know the content? Am I prepared for the exam? Am I able to, if I look at Bloom's taxonomy, right? Level of am I able to create, or do I have a basic knowledge awareness? Where am I at on the pendulum? In relationships, as a man who has to wear a hat as father, husband, brother, son, facilitator, coach, all these different things, how do you, and you mentioned about how you show up in various ways, but how do you maintain authenticity in each respect, even though you have limitations on how much you share?
And just fact check, 1 Corinthians 3:7. 1 Peter 3:7.
Okay, 1 Peter 3:7. No problem. Yeah. Everyone take 1 Peter 3:7. Go ahead, Brewster.
But authenticity, I think it comes down to James wrote, he said, when you look at yourself in the mirror, you don't want to be like the man who forgets what he looks like and just moves on.
Yes.
And so I think authenticity is really tough. And it's funny that right now we're in the age of socially where we have to wear a mask. And a lot of times we are wearing masks figuratively, and we have worn them so long that we don't even know that we have them on. And
Yeah.
that's why even now I hate wearing a mask when I go out. Not because I don't want to be, not because I don't want to be healthy or I don't want to protect the next person. It's because I figuratively lived with a mask for so long. And in order to take that mask off, you have to know who you are. And when this is what I mean, you have to know not just who you are, but you need to know your worth. You need
Yeah.
to know who has called you. Um, Romans chapter 8, verse, I believe it's 28 and 29. Paul writes and talks about how we've been called. He said, for like God has called you, right? And you're called, and all things work together for good for those who love him. But here's the thing, before you get to that part in Romans 8:28 through 30, before that, he talks about how we're heirs and we're sons and we're daughters. And to know that you don't have to wear a mask, you have to know that the God, the creator of the universe, has invited you into his family, and he calls you an heir with Christ, with your big brother, Jesus. He
Yeah.
calls you an heir with him. And so, because you're an heir, that means you're a son and daughter. And if that's who you are, then why do you have to wear a mask?
Mm.
Because when you wear the mask, what it does, it actually prevents people from seeing who you are as an heir and son and daughter to God and Christ being your Lord and Savior. When people can't see that, they'll never be able to see the true you. So for me, I had to learn that I belong. That I don't, and that was one of the biggest things for me growing up is acceptance and wanting to belong. And I don't know if it was attributed to the fact that I am Black and Mexican, or whatever, but you look for you want in your identity. We naturally want to belong. We
Yeah.
naturally want to fit in. That's why fashion is so popular, because it allows us to give us ourselves a voice of who we are, so people can say, "Oh yeah, you look good. You look this way." But we want to naturally belong, and so because of that, we belong when Christ calls us and saves us and we respond to that. We belong to him as an heir and as a son and a daughter. And when I learned that, it was easy to be authentic. So the number one role that I wear first as a man is son to
Yeah.
the creator. And
Mhm.
because I wear that title, it's easy. I wouldn't say it's easy, but I have more freedom to be who I am as a husband. I have
Yeah.
more freedom to be who I am as a father. I have more freedom to be who I am in whatever career path I go, in whatever business venture I take on, and whatever discipleship that I'm a part of or being discipled. I have freedom to be who I am because, first off, the creator has not condemned me.
Right.
He's
Well,
called me into his family. That means, like it says, the very first chapter of Romans 8:1, therefore now there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And because of that, I can walk in authenticity and freedom because I'm a son. And so I don't have to worry about looking like I have it all together
mhm.
because Christ knows where I'm at. And because of that, like I'm good. I'm okay. I'm right where I need to be. Wherever you're at, I would say this to anybody, wherever you're at, you're right where you need to be. And right where you need to be is for Christ to call you his son or daughter. It just comes down to, are you just humble enough to respond? And then that comes back to the trauma that you've experienced. And is that trauma either breaking you or is it hardening you? And it's doing one or two things.
Go ahead.
It's
I'm
doing
like,
one or two.
I'm like, what you stopping for? Go ahead.
It's doing one or two things,
Yes.
um, and I think as it breaks us, it draws us closer. But unfortunately, sometimes it draws us further away, and that's maybe because we have maybe chosen not to listen and to respond, even though Christ is there calling us and getting our attention. And I think for me, he gets our attention in the way that he needs to get our attention, because I never thought that going through what I went through in the psychiatric ward, um, you know, and here's a little bit more of my story, years of being addicted to pornography, right? Like all of that, and going through that, and having and bringing all that trauma and messing to my marriage. And then for me, what did it though was what it did to my wife. It's like our current responsible for him and other human beings. But this will be blood on your hands. And it was at the point where I said, enough is enough. I'm listening, God. I'm listening. Because it started to affect my wife. And it started to bring her into a place of more from her own that she already experienced, because her own baggage was now adding baggage to her that I have to. So it's like, how are we going to travel? How are we going to travel this this life? How are we going to travel? And I knew I could make a certain amount of bags on the carry-on, and I was adding way too much. Yeah. And that's when it changed for me, because I was like, I'm not going to injure this woman. She's be flesh on my own. What am I doing to her? And that's where, and we didn't get into that part, but that's where the authenticity flipped for me. It was like, enough. Yeah. No, because she's valuable. She's valuable.
Well, I know we're short on time, but I don't care. Like I said in the email, if we got to go over, we got to go over. It is what it is. Let's talk about that, because let's talk about pornography. Let's talk about those things. So, right. One of the things I want to shout out is thank God for praying parents. And whether it's a godparent, whether it's a grandparent, whoever, or aunts and uncles, thank God for intercessors that intercede on our behalf. Because I think back to what you were saying with your dad, that he prayed and fasted, and went back to what Jesus said. Some of these things ain't going to come out unless you pray and fast, but to see you be delivered, to see you be restored, and then to know that just because you've been delivered and restored doesn't mean you still don't have issues and trials. I think that's a misconception that people think, like, oh, I can't go to church, I'm still messed up. Like, no, that's the main reason to go, because we're always
restoration.
Yeah, we're always going to be a mess. And so let's go there. Let's, what was that? Where did that come from? Where did pornography come into Kermit R. Boyd's life? At what age and how?
Yeah. So I was a young kid, grew up in Pomona. And for me, growing up, I wanted to belong, wanted to have friends like any kid. So I was in grade school, and it was like, hey, hey guys, come to my house in the summer. We went to one of our friends' houses, like, look around, and sure enough, he had some adult films that were on his cable, and we just were captivated. Just all of us that were in that room, we just watched it. And from there, I was trying to figure out, I wonder if I have those channels on my TV. And so I'm trying to find those channels in my home, trying to look for it. I'm going to great pains and lengths to find them. We wind up, as we get a little bit older into middle school and so forth, start passing around tapes, VHS tapes to each other. And it's just going, passing that around. And then in high school, then it becomes more accessible because of the internet. So then I start to dabble in that on the internet. And then there's a period where I'm like, enough. When I'm about to go to college, I just stop for a bit. And then when I start dating, I get back into it, and then it follows me into marriage. And it wasn't until I was married where freedom came, because I was just fed up with it. I don't know how else to say it, because the fed up feeling came from the way I saw it destroy my wife. when I had to confess to her, like, I'm doing stuff that I shouldn't be doing, and this is what I'm doing. Well, actually, she found something on my phone, and she
Mm.
knew a little bit because I stopped right before we got married. Before we started dating and got married, I wasn't doing it. And then stress and trauma triggered me using it in our first year of our marriage, where I didn't deal with things. And then the stress of trying to be a provider and all of that began to come in. And so, because I've already was used to coping with stress and trauma with that, that's what I went back to, because I wasn't telling her how I was feeling about our finances and stress that I felt, and having to get extra jobs and work and make sure we were good. And so I'm like, I just got to deal with this stress. And I wasn't going to Christ. So I went to that.
Mm.
And when I went to that, we were driving one day and she found it on my phone, and I don't even know how. And I just had to deny it. And then I was like, then I told her later, I was like, oh, that was mine. Um, and that was tough. And even after that, I was honest with her, because she was like, I want you to tell me when you're struggling, and when you do it. I did, but that was too much for her,
Right.
and it was killing her. And she started to resent me, and she started to have backlash towards me, and it just became a toxic. It became very toxic in our relationship, and we have a little child, and so there was a lot of healing, a lot of talking, a lot of intervention from other loving married couples in our life that love Jesus, that were able to help us. And we were able to overcome, but it came from me saying enough is enough. And I'm not going to break my marriage in this way anymore, because it was literally breaking us.
Yes.
And pornography is the epidemic that no one wants to ever really address except fund. And like, that's going to kill America more than COVID, more than a president. That's what's
Right.
going to kill this nation, um, and along with other things. But yes, so that's what that's what did it for me. I was like, enough is enough. I'm not, because then how would I explain that to my daughter? How would I explain to her, mommy and daddy are not together because dad has a problem?
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to let Satan win. And so you have to come to a place of complete and utter, like, brokenness, and that's where I was at that point. It's like brokenness has been a part of my life for a long time. Now I'm
Sure.
just trying to walk it. Now it's time to walk in that restoration, and that's what. And I was going to say to you when you were talking, restoration doesn't like mean perfection. Like,
Correct.
restoration is just a part of this. If you're a believer, if you believe in Jesus and you live in love for him, like, restoration is a part of sanctification. And it's the part of sanctification that is very difficult to get to, because you have to deal with all the junk and all the mess and all the trauma and all the brokenness to actually say, I'm being restored. And I feel like that's like, although 2020 is tough, like 2020 for my family, despite our own tragedy, has been like a process of healing and dealing with different stuff. So yeah, so it's just like, geez, like, I had to get to a place with pornography where I literally did not want it to destroy my life anymore. And it was like, help, somebody help. And
Yeah.
that's where you have to get.
That's good. That is good. That is, oh boy, because the reality is everybody's dealing with something. Number one,
Mm,
but that topic, pornography, because so many people are so weird to call it what it is.
right.
People want to call addictions or mental illnesses or oh, he did a little touch. No, the boy crazy. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Or she's crazy. Or we don't want to deal with the issues. And one of the
Mm,
things you mentioned from a culture perspective, that we're very retroactive.
yeah.
We rather languish and reverberate in the aftermath versus being proactive, revolutionary, and saying the buck stops here, it won't come nigh my dwelling. One of the
Yeah.
things I'm holding on, I'm not going to allow myself and anything that I'm attached to fall down that way. We're going to get to the root. We're going to get to the root. We're going to get it. We're going to get it done. And I've had to realize that in myself. Where does that come from, Camille? Why are you feeling this way? Why does this trigger you here? And be ready for that mirror. Like you said, the word of God, I tell people all the time, the word of God is a mirror. I thank God that he crafts in us who we are. And like you said, we're right in the place where we need to be. Wherever that might be in life, whether you are, excuse me, actively walking with him, heard about him, ain't really committed. You kind of like King Agrippa, almost got me, but not yet. Whatever it might be, you're where you're supposed to be at the moment. And that is a beautiful thing of grace. Right. That person who might be drug addicted, that person that might be living in an adverse condition, whatever, God still sees you. He still knows you, and he's still talking to you. But are you going to humble yourself and say, you know what? I hear you. Come on in. That's huge. I feel that as this series has been dedicated to men, I feel that every man, woman, boy, or girl who might watch this show at this point or in future years can benefit from these conversations. Yeah, and I am so grateful. And I know we didn't get to the fullness of your story. I'm actually going to give your information to my father. He does a men's fellowship on the 4th Saturdays of every month. But I would love for you to be a featured guest. And I won't be there, because I'm not a man. Whatever. But, and I'd love to have you back on the show because there's a couple of conversations that a couple of words that you said that brought up some conversations that I want to maybe do in the future. And I said, this will be interesting, kind of spicy. But I want to say thank you. The audience has thoroughly enjoyed you. Stephanie, love you, girl. But my mother had a typo there. She said, we are our brothers and sisters. Keep it absolutely. No, we don't either, Mom. Thank God. She's saying, thank God for your love and concern for your wife. Yeah. Definitely want to put a nickel there. And I'll give us some closing thoughts on this. You mentioned before about grace and mercy and what we as women should respond in dealing with, especially when it comes to that man being vulnerable. You gave some nuggets for the man to listen to the wife and hear. How can you, or what can you encourage as an action item step that someone can maybe challenge? Couples might be watching this that can challenge themselves to employ this in the next few days in regards to showing or exemplifying true concern for one another.
I would say the first action item would be to whatever you're doing, right? Outside of, I'll just say like this. If you're struggling, right, stop what you're doing. And you need to reconnect. And the one way that I had to reconnect with my wife is I had to let her say whatever she needed to say to me. And maybe you need to let your spouse say whatever they need to say with you. Because the thing is when we go to God and we say whatever we need to say to him, he doesn't say stop. He doesn't say, okay, that's enough. I got to go. Someone else is talking to me. Let me go listen to them. No, he listens. He lets you unload. He lets you say what you want to say. Job did that, right? You see Peter doing that. You see even the Apostle Paul doing that. And so when I let her just get it out, it was an opportunity to reconnect. And at that point, when she did, my response was just to cry and to weep, because you don't know what it's doing to the other person until you know.
Yeah.
And I knew when I let her share without condemnation, without feeling like I was going to rebuttal or try to defend myself, it was then at that moment where the reconnecting and the healing was able to start. And then from there, it's actually finding time. And so what I had to do was the time, the intention that I gave to other things that were ungodly. And when I say ungodly, I mean that they weren't really pointing me in a direction to love my wife better, to love my daughter consistently. If it wasn't like doing those things, then to me it was ungodly. And it
Yeah.
was like, I need to now give that time back to my wife, Tamara. And it was very, um,
It's good.
I mean, we've been through a lot. I mean, that's a whole story in and of itself. But when I started doing that and giving her that time and listening to her, that's where she started to trust me again. That's where we started to rebuild our friendship, where she started to be like, wow, he does care. And for me, I have like a really, really bad sneaker fetish. And I'm talking about just, yeah, that's what I could say. And it was like those moments where I said, you know what, I'm not going to buy this for me, but I'm going to buy this for you. I'm going to take my money that I would normally spend on me and I'm going to spend it on you. So it's taking what I value and showing her that you are more valuable because I'm putting the value back into you. And so that's when the reconnection got further. And so if I had to break it down, it's like reconnect, stop what you're doing, let them talk to you, let them unload on you. If you both need to unload, you both need to have a session where you can talk and it can be unfiltered. And if you need to do it with a therapist, you need to do that so they can mediate it, right? And they'll give you steps on how to do that. The other thing is then you have to then take the reconnect even further and say, how can I reinvest my time into you? The things that I was giving my time to that wasn't building up my marriage or my children, I now need to give that back to you. And then the third thing is show that monetarily, whether it's taking what you would normally spend on yourself and spending that on her, because the Bible says, where your heart is, that's where your treasure is also. And if my wife is the closest thing to God and has my heart, then I need to be showing her that in some way monetarily, date nights, vacations, and having that regular and we have a cadence for that we adopted last year, and so that cadence needs to be something that all couples adopt, whatever that looks like. Whether you, hey, every year we're going to get away for anniversary, every 3 months we're going to get away and do like a staycation. Every month we're always going to commit to do a date, like something where it's just you and me, a spent overnighter one night, and then having that time to date each other. And that takes work. That takes work. And you have to, and if you don't do it, that means you just don't care. Like you just hear whatever about it.
Come on. Come on here. Like I just my best friend, my sister Galathea, she's giving you a round of applause. I'm like, listen, okay, that that deserves a round of praise clap because all I hear what you're saying is intentional.
Yeah, you got to be. That's my favorite word, intentionality. Being
Yeah,
intentionality, because in order to be vulnerable, you have to be intentional. Like
yeah,
because you're not just going to be invulnerable to be vulnerable. Vulnerability comes from I need to be intentional about what I'm about to do.
yeah.
So yeah.
That's good. Well, this will not be the only time you will be on the Be Healed web show. I can tell you that. Only, I mean, unless you don't, unless it falls in one of them cadences of the 3 month, the year, or the date night. I mean, but look, Tuesday nights at 7. I just are you free because
Yeah,
this is. But you're speaking from a place of experience. You're speaking from a place of one of the things that, like you mentioned about not wearing the mask, and we're not talking, so just so we're clear, we're not talking about the COVID mask because we have to be safe, guys. We're not talking about that. We're
right,
talking about the mask of life, the
right.
mask of our issues, not wearing those, but showing up in authenticity because, like you said, there's no need to see or pretend as you have it all together. That
Mm-mm.
is that should free someone tonight. That should be
I'm
free.
going to give you a saying. So I tell my students, I say, you guys heard it say, fake it till you make it, but I tell you this, make it so you never have to fake it.
Yes.
And when I tell them that, I always explain it like this. I say, when I say make it, I'm not talking about how much money you're going to get, like where you're going to be driving, what you're going to be doing. When I say make it, what I'm talking about is you have to come to a place where you can be real with yourself. And when you're real with yourself, you've made it, because then you can do anything because you understand what your worth is. And nobody will be able to tell you differently. So I said, that's how you need to make it. And that's what it is. I say, make it so you never have to fake it. And that's what we're trying to do. We're all trying to fake it till we make it. And it's like, man, I'm done with that.
Absolutely. It's, you're all right with me, Doc. I'm gonna have to tell Chucky, you know what? You just earned a spot on the B Hill production team with making sure we get guests. This is awesome.
Camille,
so,
I just want to say it was a pleasure being a part of this show. So thank you for having me. Seriously.
Absolutely. You mentioned that we can. You have a brand.
So it's actually OVR brand.
Okay, OVR. Let me fix that.
OVR brand.
Right now,
OVR brand. Yeah, so we do a lot of cool things. Like I said, we're venturing into being able to really just brand ourselves as who we are, and that's helping others, because the theme is others over self. And so we're working on a couple of big projects to actually show that within the educational system, because myself and the other, and actually the founding member is in education as well. And it started in his classroom. And that's how Others Over Self came into the classroom from Philippians 2:23. And so Philippians 2:3. So starting there, we just want to highlight people and show that the others are important, and this is why. And so, we're doing some cool things that we're trying to just get off the ground right now. We have a lot of clothing, but we just want to really highlight who we are. That's helping others.
I love that. Well, I'll go on that website. I'm gonna check it out, and definitely support. I look forward to even maybe having you and Tamara on the line. Yeah. That would be great, because my next couple of conversations in the future, I'm dealing with couples and some things. So we'll stay tuned for that. But I just want to bid all of you that were able to tune in. If you enjoyed what you heard tonight, please make sure that you subscribe on YouTube to the channel. Make sure that you're following along. You can set your advertisements, your reminders rather, on Facebook to get notified of the Be Healed Web Show. This is not something that I planned. This is not something that I could ever create myself. This is the Lord's doing, and it's marvelous in our eyes. And I'm so grateful. Thank you again, Reverend Dr. Bishop, teacher. No, just Kermit R. Boyd. And it's funny that you say middle name was R, because my dad's middle name is with the R. So I'm like, I've always said, when I meet Camille's, most Camille's have an R middle name. And now I can add Kermit's to the R middle name. I'm like, okay. So, but nevertheless, God bless you. God bless you all for tuning in. Thank you. We will see you all next week. Same back time, same back channel. And next week we have another amazing gentleman who's going to close us out, Emmanuel Allen, outside of Glendale, Arizona. And so we want to tune in. And I'm really feeling, Kermit, that we're going to have to probably take all 8 of you and do one night, do a one-nighter, and just have all
panel discussion.
Yes, that's what I'm feeling. So be on the lookout for an email on that, so I can set up a day and time of when we can set that up. That'll be good. Yeah, I'm like, I'm excited.
Camille, again, thank you. Grace and peace to your audience, and that was a pleasure. So thank you for letting me be vulnerable.
Absolutely. Anytime. You're always vulnerable. You always welcome for vulnerability here. All right. You all have a wonderful night. We will see you next week. God bless.